Marvel Champions players are living in the age of archetypes. While it may be hyperbolic to say that archetypes didn't exist in the game prior, as decks built around repurpose or rapid response have existed for years, I think an examination of the last year has left me feeling like we've been spoiled with hero packs that provide us with entire blocks of an archetype, or legitimizing decks that had been lacking up to this point. A lot of this has been fed by the release of the Nightcrawler hero pack, which really highlighted an entire archetype that I think was viable but didn't exist up to this point, or at least didn't have tools to benefit from card advantage. And I think this goes beyond the bare necessities that a hero pack needs to kind of just exist. They already need to be prepackaged decks that all play straight out of the box. But I think that there has been an intentional effort by the designers to carve out new lines of play for aspects. For new players, I hope this can be a help in deciding which hero packs to pick up. And for veterans, I hope that this can be an adventure that we can all go on and talk about new archetypes that have opened up right beneath our feet. Right off the bat, we've got the Domino deck. As I dove back through the last few waves, I didn't think the Next Evolution box was going to be necessarily where this all started. But while much of what came from Domino's deck could be considered glorified staples for her and her alone, the idea that there are cards that care if they've been discarded from the top of your deck is something that can be taken advantage of by a few heroes, such as Iron Man. Additionally, I see Sharpshooter as a card that definitely has its place with Domino, but could also be used in Hawkeye and hopefully heroes moving forward, especially with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. coming. I think the cards that come to mind most in this are Digging Deep and White Fox, which have kind of been identified as the cards that you're going to want the most when you're playing with this strategy. In fact, I just want Digging Deep to get a reprint because I want to put it in so many decks, because the concept of cards being taken off the top of your deck by the encounter deck is not something that is completely unprecedented. The fact that these cards are basic also points to the fact that they are cards that Fantasy Flight wants heroes to have access to, regardless of what aspect they fall into, and the existence of Magic allows this type of top deck control to be bent in new ways separate from Domino. As we look at the Confusion Lock aspect that was opened up by Psylocke, at first I didn't want to include her because I thought to myself that Confusion Lock kind of already had legitimacy, but I was basing that off of only thinking of Upside the Head. And then I remembered that both Cypher and Float Like a Butterfly came from this pack as well. And I'll admit that Stun and Confused Lock decks are just not my form of fun, but I can definitely see how the inclusion of these three cards, two of which can be in multiples, should be enough to flesh out the archetype and really make a Justice deck that looks to remain in an alter ego for long stretches far more viable. What I'd like about this most is that they are not simply confusing a villain or a minion, but they're using the status tokens as a mechanism to gain card advantage or deal additional damage. Honestly, for as much as I love Miles Morales, I think that was my biggest complaint with just how his deck worked, was that you were kind of just taking activations away from the villain, which is a viable strategy, but just not something that I love. As such, instead of being a strategy that just stalls out, they become a strategy that is actually being more proactive. Admittedly, the weakest on my proposed list, the Angel deck provides basic cards that really solidify the aerial strategy. If not into legitimacy, then providing it with the tools it needs to be a little bit more distinct aspect to aspect. The basic cards, Cannonball, Power of Flight, and Soaring Acrobatics, help to flesh out decks that can now be equipped with Bombs Away, Eyes in the Sky, Flying Formation, or Aerial Intervention, depending on which aspect you choose. As Angel is a character with natural aerial, this should have come as no surprise, but I will say that as a player who existed prior to this pack's release, this focus on aerial really helped to make that trait seem viable for the first time in maybe in game's entire history. The Deadpool pack is controversial, something that I hope the community can move past once enough time has been removed from Deadpool's release. I think the pool aspect in itself, making the icons that are normally a drawback into something that can be used to further your position in the game, is valuable. From allies that do not take consequential damage to Da Bomb, which is in itself just a hilarious card. Once you get past the pink frame and puns like pool inspection, you get down to a aspect that was birthed in last year that focuses on just being a little bit more reckless with your plays and trying to benefit from that. This might be the archetype brought to the table in the last year that is going to be most requiring of experience to be properly threading the needle. But an archetype that plans to play on such a razor's edge is something that I appreciate from time to time, and I imagine that members of the community really can get a thrill out of. Possibly my favorite addition to Marvel Champions this year is the creation of the Sidekick/suit-up archetype brought to us by the Bishop deck in the Age of Apocalypse campaign box. I was not much of a fan of the leadership aspect before this, which is fine because the game is so much more than just a single aspect. But giving us suit-up and side-by-side not only highlighted our identity-specific allies, but opened the game up to making Voltron into something more substantial. And I'm going to come to the table with my own biases when it comes to the Sidekick archetype. I happen to think that Cable and Deadpool make for a great team for that archetype, but the beautiful part about what the Sidekick package has brought into the game is that if you want to do X-23 and Honey Badger, you can make that happen. If you want to use Vision and Vivian, you can make that happen. And I think that this archetype being added is speaking to a portion of the community that wanted to focus on allies but didn't want to go wide. They wanted to go tall. And that has existed for the longest time. You just go look for whatever deck.voltron you want. But I think this is something that, once again, legitimacy is the word of the day here. Iceman was the point when I started to feel like they were actually starting to inject archetypes into the game through hero packs. I just didn't think that it was going to be such a large theme of the wave until I pulled focus and looked at the cards that have come out in the last year. Iceman, using his Frostbite ability to feed into a strategy where aggression cares about attachments on enemies, is a breath of fresh air that I didn't know I needed. This has brought new life to Valkyrie. I think that's a pretty low-hanging fruit. But I'll say that I'm more inclined to play Cyclops in aggression now, which is weird because I only ever thought of him as a leadership character. Lastly, we come to the newest archetype and the inspiration for this entire video, what I'm going to quickly be calling the Change of Fortune archetype, that is focused on defeating enemies during the villain phase. This was something that I think was viable to do prior to this pack, but the creation of Change of Fortunes allows you to actually gain card advantage, which is something that I don't think we really had access to before this. And this makes heroes that want minions in play, like Thor, actually have something to do in protection besides just being part of a ready-up archetype. Personally, I have seen a lot of benefit for Black Panther, who I think was a powerful hero, but because he's part of the core set, I would say has probably gone forgotten by many of the player base because you just get pulled into all these new heroes and what they can do, and you sort of forget that there's a hero that naturally comes with Retaliate. Taking protection and giving it something to do during the villain phase that, once again, is being proactive. Like, obviously, Ghost Spider, extremely proactive. But to say that you're going to take that aspect of I'm defeating enemies during the villain phase and actually like turn it into something that is changing the landscape of the scenario is such a, once again, breath of fresh air. By now I've done all my talking, and I would love for the audience to have a chance to ring in. Like, what archetypes have you seen over the course of the entire life of the game that were really hinged on a particular hero coming out? Not only in the last year, but in the entire 5-year history of the game. I look forward to your comments, and I will see you all on the next one.